My daughter asked me to stay in the background at her graduation. She said she didn't want me in the photos. So I stepped out of the frame, out of her moment. When she later needed help with her first rent payment, I stayed out of that too. Now she wants me to. You know, the kind of silence that cuts deeper than any scream? I experienced it on my daughter's graduation day. She begged me to stay in the background, out of the photos, out of her moment. I don't want you in photos, she said, her voice flat, masking a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. So I stood in the back, factory grime still under my fingernails, and watched her laugh with her friends like I was just another face in the crowd. And when she needed help with her first rent payment, just months later, I stayed out of that, too. Because I finally realized, I was done begging for a place in her picture. My name is Tom. I work at the local factory, the one with the walls so thick you can't hear the thunder of the machines from the outside. It's the kind of place that eats up your hands and your back, makes your clothes smell like oil and sweat no matter how many times you wash them. I've worked there since I was 18. Back when I thought a steady paycheck was the only way to prove you were worth a damn. I guess I never stopped believing that. Even when the only person I was trying to prove it to stopped seeing me altogether. I stood in the back row on my daughter's graduation day. My steel-toed boots scuffing against the grass. Factory grime still caught under my fingernails. She'd asked me to stay out of the pictures. Said she wanted it to be just her and her friends. That she didn't want me to stand there with my calloused hands and the smell of the factory on my jacket. She said it so carefully, like she thought I might not notice how her voice went flat when she said it. But I did. I noticed every syllable, every flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. And I said nothing. I stayed where she told me to stay. Out of the way. Out of the picture. You ever been in that kind of silence? The kind where your own breath sounds too loud and you wonder if maybe you're the one who's wrong for even being there. That's how it felt. Standing there while the other fathers threw their arms around their daughters and beamed for the cameras. I kept my hands in my pockets, kept my mouth shut, and watched her laugh with her friends like I was just another face in the crowd. Maybe that's all I was to her. Another face she could edit out of the story she was telling. I don't think she meant to hurt me. At least I want to believe that. But standing there, I realized something sharp and painful. Wanting to believe the best in someone doesn't mean they're not capable of cutting you to the bone. And in that moment, I decided I wasn't going to fight to be in her picture anymore. If she wanted me on the outside, then that's where I'd stay. I didn't say a word about it. Didn't ask her why. I just watched the way she held her diploma like it was a ticket out of everything I'd given her. And I let the silence do what it does best, wrap itself around me like a second skin. The ceremony went on, all the speeches and cheers blending into a low hum in my ears. I don't remember the principal's name or the speech about new beginnings and boundless futures. All I remember is the way my daughter kept her back to me, the way she never once looked in my direction. I wanted to be proud of her. I was proud of her. But pride doesn't fill the hole that opens up when you realize you're not part of someone's plans for the future. Afterward, when everyone gathered for pictures, I stayed behind the hedge near the parking lot. I watched her pose with her friends, watched the way she laughed like nothing had ever been hard. She looked happy, and I told myself that was enough. I'd spent most of my life trying to make her happy, working double shifts and giving up the things I wanted so she could have more. But that day, I realized I'd been working for a place in her life that she didn't want to give. And standing there in the shadow of that hedge, I made a quiet promise to myself. I'd stop trying to prove I belonged. If she wanted me out of the picture, I'd give her exactly what she asked for. I left before she even noticed. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't wait for her to remember I was there. I walked back to my truck, the factory logo on my jacket catching the last of the sun, and I felt something break free in my chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like relief, the kind that comes when you stop begging for scraps of someone else's life. I knew then that I was done trying to be the man she wanted me to be. I was just going to be the man I am. And if that meant standing alone, well, I've been alone in a room full of people before. It doesn't scare me the way it used to. Driving home, I kept seeing her smile in the rearview mirror, bright and wide, but never aimed at me. I let it wash over me, the way the factory whistle does at the start of every shift. Sharp, final. And I thought about how I'd been working that same job for decades. How the machines never cared if I was proud or ashamed. They just kept turning, kept pressing steel into shape. Maybe that's what I was meant to be. Something that holds its form no matter who's watching. When I got home, I took off my jacket and sat at the kitchen table, the one with the crack down the middle that she had once said we should replace. I ran my fingers along that crack and thought about how I'd never replaced it because it still worked, even if it wasn't perfect. That's how I felt about myself, too. Not perfect. Not the picture she wanted, but still standing. I don't know if she'll ever understand what that day meant to me. How her small request to stay out of the photos was like a door closing in my face. But I understood it. I understood it better than she probably wanted me to. And from that day forward, I decided I wasn't going to fight for a seat at her table anymore. If she wanted me in the background, I'd stay there. But I'd make damn sure that in the background, I was still whole, still real, still me. Because here's the thing, the factory never needed me to be anything but what I was. The machines didn't care if I was good enough. They just needed me to show up and do the work. And maybe that's all I need to be for myself, too. Just a man who shows up, does the work, and doesn't apologize for taking up space. So that's what I did. I showed up at the factory the next day, just like I always had. My hands were rough, my back ached, but I felt something steady inside me, a kind of quiet resolve I hadn't known I could still find. I let the noise of the machines drown out everything else. Let the rhythm of the work remind me that I was still here, still solid, even if she never wanted to see it. That was the day I stopped begging to be in her picture. And that was the day I started drawing the outlines of my own. I went back to the factory the day after her graduation. Nothing had changed there. Same clang of metal against metal, same dull ache in my shoulders by noon, same foreman barking orders like the world was on fire and we were the only ones who could save it. There's a strange comfort in that kind of routine, even when it wears you down. At least the machines don't lie. They don't tell you they want you out of the picture one day and then call you the next because they've run out of options. I had just gotten home from the late shift when she called. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, rattling against the chipped ceramic cup I keep there. I didn't rush to answer. I watched the way the phone lit up with her name, Alyssa, like it had a pulse of its own. For a second, I almost let it ring out. Almost. But there's a part of me that's always going to answer when she calls, no matter how far back in the picture she's pushed me. She didn't say it outright. She never does. She asked how I was, if I'd been keeping busy. I told her about the overtime I'd been picking up, how I'd started getting to work an hour early just to have a few minutes of quiet before the machines roared to life. She said that sounded nice, but I could hear the strain in her voice, the careful way she paused between words. And I knew before she said it, I knew she needed something. Dad, she said finally, her voice small and careful. I'm a little behind on rent this month. I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence stretch, felt it settle over me like the weight of a night shift. She didn't rush to fill it either. Maybe she was waiting to see if I'd jump in with an offer like I always used to, but I didn't. I just let her sit in the pause she'd made. I can pay you back, she added, her tone almost apologetic. It's just a temporary thing. You know how it is. Yeah, I know how it is. I've known for years. Knew it when she was in college when the tuition bills piled up and I picked up every extra shift I could to cover them. Knew it when she wanted a new car, a deposit on her first apartment, 1,000 other things that seemed to matter more than the man footing the bill. But back then, I never let her feel the weight of it. I always stepped in before she had to stumble. I thought that's what fathers were supposed to do. But that was before she told me to stay out of the picture, before she made it clear that the only parts of me she wanted were the ones that didn't show up in the frame. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said. Finally, my voice even and quiet. I could almost feel her flinch on the other end of the line. You're resourceful. Always have been. Dad, I just need a little help this one time, she said. Her words rushed now, like she'd heard the decision in my tone and was trying to outrun it. I promise I'll pay you back. I closed my eyes and thought about the factory, about the way I'd spent half my life there so she wouldn't have to worry about things like this, about how she'd erased me from her graduation day like I was just another smudge in the background. And I thought about how easy it would be to give in, to slip back into the role I'd played for so long, always there, always ready to fix it. But I didn't. I kept my voice steady, my resolve sharp. I know you will, I said. But I think it's time you figured it out on your own. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing. The way her sigh caught in her throat. When she spoke again, her voice was tight, clipped. Okay, she said. I guess I'll figure it out. Yeah, I said softly. I know you will. We said our goodbyes and the call ended. I stood there for a long time afterward, the phone still in my hand, the kitchen around me feeling both too big and too small. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. It just felt quiet, like the world had finally settled into the shape it was always meant to take. I know some people would say that was cruel, that I should have helped her, that fathers don't just turn their backs like that, but it didn't feel like cruelty to me. It felt like honesty. Because the truth is, I've spent too many years being the man she could always count on to bail her out, to stand behind her with my pockets turned inside out and a smile on my face. And I'm done with that. I'm done being the safety net she never bothered to see. That night, I lay in bed with the factory noise still humming in my ears, even though I was miles away from those machines. I thought about the first time she asked me for help, how small her voice had been, How proud she'd sounded when she paid me back with her first paycheck. I thought about how somewhere along the way, that turned into an expectation. Like my job wasn't just to work the factory line, but to be the line she crossed over every time she needed to feel safe. I don't know if she'll ever understand why I said no this time. Maybe she'll think I stopped caring. Maybe she'll think I'm punishing her for what she said at graduation. But it's not about punishment. It's about truth. And the truth is, I can't keep being the man in the background, quietly making her life easier while she pretends I'm not there. I went to the factory the next morning and I worked my shift like I always do. The machines don't care if you're someone's father or just another pair of hands. They just keep moving, keep grinding away. And there's something clean about that, something honest. I took comfort in it the way I always have, because in that noise there's no room for doubt. No room for anything but the work. I don't know what she did to make the rent that month. I don't know if she borrowed from someone else or picked up extra shifts at her job or went without. Part of me wanted to ask, but I didn't because that's her life to figure out now. And mine? Mine's the factory, the guitar in the corner of my room, the quiet cups of coffee in the early hours before the machines start. I'm learning that's enough, that it has to be. And if she ever decides she wants me in the picture again, she'll know where to find me. I'll be right here, hands rough from the work, back straight, no apologies left to give. The thing about working in a factory is that you learn to move in rhythm. Machines don't wait for you to figure it out. They don't pause to see if you're tired or if your head's somewhere else. They just keep going. And if you want to stay in one piece, you learn to match them. There's a strange comfort in that kind of work, in the way it demands everything you've got in the moment and nothing more. You don't have to think about what's next. You don't have to think about what's gone. You just move. I'd been moving like that for years. Head down, shoulders hunched, always trying to keep up. But after that call with Alyssa, something shifted in me. It was like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there. And suddenly, I set it down. I still showed up at the factory, still did the work. But when I clocked out at the end of the day, I didn't carry it home with me the way I used to. I didn't rush to check my phone for her messages or wonder what she might need next. I started leaving those questions at the door along with my work boots. The first thing I did was clear out the spare room, the one that used to be hers. It still looked like she just stepped out for a minute, even though she hadn't stayed there in years. The old posters peeling off the walls, the bedspread she'd picked out when she was 15, the stack of boarding school brochures she'd left behind, like she couldn't decide whether to dream bigger or not at all. I'd kept it all there, untouched, like I was waiting for her to come back and claim it. Like I was afraid to admit that maybe she never would. I started with the bed, stripped it down to the mattress, folded the sheets into neat squares. Even though my hands felt clumsy and wrong, there was something final about it, something that felt like drawing a line in the dust. I moved the bed frame out to the garage and sat on the bare floor for a while, just breathing in the emptiness. It was quiet. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Relief. Next, I pulled out my old guitar. It had been sitting in the back of the closet, half forgotten, the strings loose and dusty. I used to play it when she was little, before work took up every spare minute, before I felt like I had to be someone else just to be her father. I tightened the strings, wiped the dust from the wood, and let my fingers find the shape of an old song. My calluses had softened over the years, but the muscle memory was still there. The music didn't care if I was rusty. It didn't care if I was a good father or a failure. It was just there, waiting for me to pick it up again. I started playing a little every night, just for myself. The sound of it filled the empty room, soft and stubborn, like a promise I didn't know I was making. It felt good. Good in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or need. I realized I'd spent so long trying to be the man she wanted me to be that I'd forgotten who I was when it was just me and the music, just me and the quiet. I didn't tell her about any of this. It wasn't for her. It was for me. For the man I'd let slip away somewhere between the factory floor and the phone calls that always started with, "Can you help me out, Dad?" I didn't know her explanations. I didn't know her apologies for reclaiming my own space. In the mornings, I started getting up early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make a pot of coffee and sit on the back steps while the sky went from black to gray. There's something honest about those early hours. Something clean and unvarnished. No noise, no demands, just the sound of birds waking up and the feel of the air on my skin. I let myself breathe in that stillness. Let it settle in my bones. It was the first time in a long while I felt like I wasn't bracing for the next ask, the next reminder that I wasn't enough. At the factory, the days went on like they always had. The machines roared, the foreman shouted, and the work didn't stop. But I did. I let myself pause in the small spaces, leaning against the loading dock with a cigarette I didn't light. Feeling the sun on my face like it was the first time. I talked to the other guys, laughed at their jokes, even if my laughter felt rusty and out of place. I started to feel like a man again, not just a pair of hands, always reaching out for someone else. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about her, wondering if she was figuring it out, if she was learning what it meant to stand on her own. And every time I did, I reminded myself that it wasn't my job to make it easier for her. She'd asked me to stay out of her pictures, and I was finally listening. Maybe she'd never see how much that cost me, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I saw it, that I owned it. I don't know what the future looks like for us. I don't know if she'll ever come back and see the man I've become. The man I always was beneath all the noise and the need. But I know this much. I'm done waiting for her to tell me I'm enough. I'm done proving it to anyone but myself. And in the quiet of that spare room, with the guitar in my hands and the sun coming up over the factory roof, I finally felt like I didn't need to be in her picture to be whole. I just needed to be here, solid, steady, and enough for me. It was late when she showed up. Later than decent. Later than I'd usually keep the porch light on. I'd already washed the factory grime off my hands. Already put the guitar away in the spare room and settled in with a cup of coffee gone cold. But there she was, framed in the doorway like a question I'd never quite been able to answer. Alyssa in her worn-out coat and the same look in her eyes I'd seen on graduation day, like she wasn't sure if she was supposed to be here or not. I opened the door and we stood there for a minute, neither of us saying a word. She shifted from foot to foot, her hands buried deep in her pockets. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her mouth kept tightening like she was bracing for me to slam the door in her face. But I didn't. I just waited, the quiet between us stretching out like a bridge we'd both forgotten how to cross. "Can I come in?" she asked finally, her voice thin, the words almost lost in the hush of the night. I stepped back and let her in. She moved past me, her eyes flicking around the room like she was trying to find a piece of herself she'd left behind. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee grounds and the faint tang of motor oil that never really leaves my skin. She sat down at the table, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller. I didn't ask her why she was here. I didn't offer to make her a plate of food or put on the kettle. I just sat across from her, my hands wrapped around the chipped mug, feeling the heat seep into my palms. She looked tired, older than her years, the way people get when they're carrying more than they can hold. "How's work?" I asked finally, my voice calm. Measured. She shrugged, her eyes darting away from mine. "It's fine," she said. "Busy. Hard." She paused, her lips pressing together. "Rent's still high. Everything's still expensive." I nodded. I knew what she was saying without her saying it. But I didn't offer money. I didn't offer a way out. I just listened. The silence between us felt different now. Less like a wall and more like a doorway. But I wasn't the one who was going to step through it first. She looked around the kitchen, her gaze catching on the guitar propped in the corner, the stack of work shirts folded neat on the counter. She frowned a little, like she didn't recognize the space anymore, like she didn't recognize me. "You been playing again?" she asked, her voice careful. I nodded. "Yep. Started a while back. Thought it was time." She didn't say anything to that. Just stared at the guitar like it was some kind of betrayal. I wondered if she realized that room was never really hers to claim anymore. That the music wasn't something I owed to her memories of this place. She said finally, her voice faltering. "I thought maybe we could talk like before." I looked at her then. Really looked. The way her eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine. The way her fingers drummed nervously on the table like she was trying to keep her own heartbeat steady. And I realized in that moment that whatever she was hoping to find here, I couldn't give it to her. Not the way I used to. Not at the cost of my own peace. "We're talking," I said quietly. "But I'm not sure what you're asking me for." She flinched at that, her shoulders curling in on themselves. "I don't know," she whispered. I just wanted to be here." There was a time I would have heard that and offered her everything. Money. Comfort. My own damn heartbeat if she needed it. But I didn't move. I didn't offer. I just let the words hang there. Let her feel the weight of what it meant to be here and not have the answers handed to her. We sat in that quiet for a long time. She picked at the edge of a napkin, her fingers restless. I watched her, feeling something old and tender inside me start to ache. But I didn't give in to it. This was her silence to break. Her path to walk. Eventually, she stood up, her hands jammed deep in her pockets. "I should go," she said, her voice small. I nodded. "Okay." She looked at me like she wanted to say something more, but the words never came. She walked to the door, her step slow and uncertain, and when she paused on the threshold, I felt that flicker of the past. The part of me that wanted to reach out, to pull her back in, to promise her she'd always have a place here. But I didn't move. I just let her go. The door closed behind her with a soft click. And I sat there for a while, listening to the quiet that settled over the house like a blanket. It wasn't an empty quiet. It was a quiet I'd chosen. A quiet that felt like mine. I went to bed that night with the guitar still propped in the corner, the factory alarm set for the next morning. I knew she'd figure things out in her own way, in her own time. And I knew I wasn't the one who had to fix it for her. My job, my only job now, was to keep showing up for myself, to keep making the music, to keep working the line, to keep the peace I'd finally found. Because here's the thing, sometimes the hardest thing you can do for someone you love is to let them stand on their own. To let them feel the weight of their own choices without trying to catch them every time they stumble. And in that choice, in that quiet, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I was out of her picture. But I wasn't out of my own. The call came a week later. I had just finished another shift at the factory. The air still thick with the tang of oil and sweat that clings to you no matter how hard you scrub. My hands were raw, the skin cracked in places, but there was something steady in that ache. It reminded me that I was still here, still holding my own. When the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail the first time. I let it go again the second time, but the third time I picked up because I knew she wasn't going to stop until she got the words out. "Dad," she said, her voice tight and strained, like she'd been holding it in so long it was turning to steel in her throat. "Why didn't you help me? Why didn't you just do what you've always done?" I took a breath, let it out slow. "What do you mean?" She let out a small, sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You know what I mean. The rent. The everything. You just sat there and let me figure it out, like it didn't matter to you." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. I could hear the faint echo of the factory in the background of my mind, the steady clank of metal, the way it never stopped for anyone. I let that rhythm steady me before I answered. "I did what you asked me to do," I said finally, my voice calm, quiet. "You told me you didn't want me in the picture, so I stayed out." "That was different," she snapped. "I didn't mean it like this." I swallowed hard, feeling the crack in my chest that had been there since graduation, since before. "Maybe you didn't, but it's what you said. It's what you've been saying for a long time, even if you didn't hear it." She went silent for a moment, and I could almost feel her shock through the line, like she was realizing for the first time that I wasn't going to fill in the gaps for her anymore. "I needed you," she said finally, her voice small again. "I needed you and you just didn't show up." "I showed up," I said, my tone even. "I showed up every day for years. I worked myself to the bone so you wouldn't have to feel the weight of it. But you wanted me in the background, Alyssa. You wanted me out of the picture when it was convenient for you. And I listened." She let out a breath. Ragged and unsteady. "That's not fair." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But it's the truth." The line went quiet. I could hear her breathing, the way it hitched and stuttered like she was trying to find the right words to fill the silence. But there was nothing to say, really. The truth was already out there, laid bare between us. "I don't know how to fix this," she said finally, her voice cracking. "It's not mine to fix," I told her, my tone gentle but firm. "Not anymore." There was another long pause, and then she hung up. The line went dead and I stood there in the kitchen, my phone heavy in my hand. I let out a slow breath, feeling the echo of her voice in the quiet that followed. It didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like defeat either. It just felt final, like a chapter closing. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the old mug, and I let myself feel the ache of it. Because it did ache, this letting go. It wasn't what I'd wanted. I'd spent half my life trying to be the man she needed. The man who would always catch her when she fell. But somewhere along the way, I realized that catching her meant I was always falling too. And I was done with that. I thought about the factory, about the way the machines never wavered. How they kept turning no matter what else was happening in the world. I thought about the guitar in the corner of the spare room. The way it felt under my fingers when the rest of the world went quiet. I thought about the man I was becoming. The man who didn't need to be in anyone's picture to know his own worth. That night, I lay in bed and listened to the soft hum of the house around me. The radiator clicking in the corner, the distant wail of a train cutting through the dark. It was a kind of music in its own way, a reminder that life goes on. Even when the people you love walk away. I don't know what she's going to do now. Maybe she'll find her own way. Maybe she'll keep stumbling, but that's her road to walk, not mine to smooth out for her. And as hard as it is to say it, I know that's the most honest thing I can do for her and for me. Because here's the thing, love doesn't always mean stepping in. Sometimes it means stepping back. Sometimes it means letting someone feel the weight of their own choices, even if it breaks your heart a little to watch them struggle. And in that space, in that quiet, I found a peace I didn't think I'd ever know. I'm not out of the picture. I'm just not standing in the frame she built for me anymore. I woke up early the next morning the way I always do. The factory was waiting, but so was the quiet of those first few hours. Before the machines took over, before the world asked me to be anything more than a man standing in his own kitchen, I made coffee and watched the sun crawl over the edge of the window, turning everything gold for just a moment. It felt like a small mercy, that light, like the world was saying, "You're still here. And that's enough." I thought about Alyssa as I sipped my coffee. I thought about the crack in her voice when she asked why it didn't help. The echo of it still ringing in my head. I knew she was hurting. I knew she felt alone in a way she hadn't planned for her. And a part of me would always ache for that. For the girl she used to be, for the father I used to be for her. But I also knew this. I couldn't carry her anymore. I couldn't keep trading pieces of myself for a place in her life she wasn't willing to give. That morning, I went out to the shed I'd cleaned out months before. I turned it into a small workshop of sorts. Nothing fancy, just a bench, some tools, a place to work with my hands that wasn't the factory floor. I started on a new project, an old chair I'd found on the curb, its legs splintered and worn. I sanded it down slow, letting the dust gather on my hands, feeling the grain of the wood under my palms. There was something honest about that kind of work. No one to please but yourself. No one to tell you where you belonged. I thought about that chair as I worked. How something broken can still be made strong again. How the cracks can be part of what makes it beautiful. I thought about myself, too. How maybe the man I was becoming was like that chair. A little worn, a little cracked, but still standing, still solid. Later that day, I took the guitar out to the back step. I played for a while, the sun warm on my shoulders, the music quiet and steady. The notes felt different now, less like a memory of who I used to be and more like a promise to myself. I wasn't playing for her. I wasn't playing for anyone, just for me, just because I could. Alyssa didn't call again that week. She didn't show up at the door. And I didn't expect her to. I think she's trying to figure out who she is without me as the safety net she never had to see. I hope she finds it. I really do. But I'm not waiting for it. I'm not waiting for her to see me, to need me. I'm done living in the background of someone else's life. I've learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be a slammed door or a shouted accusation. Sometimes the sharpest revenge is the quiet choice to live your life on your own terms. To let the person who pushed you aside feel the emptiness they created while you fill that same space with your own quiet joys, your own steady peace. I don't know what the future looks like for Alyssa and me. Maybe one day she'll come back and we'll find a new way to be in each other's lives. Or maybe she won't. But either way, I'll be okay because I've stopped measuring my worth by the space she makes for me. I've stopped apologizing for the way I take up my own. As the sun dipped low and the factory whistle sounded in the distance, I felt a kind of peace settle in my chest. Not the kind that comes from someone else's approval, but the kind you earn for yourself. Quiet, stubborn, unshakable. I'm out of the picture, sure, but I'm still here, still standing. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. If you felt something in this story, if you've ever been the one standing in the background, wondering when it was your turn, then maybe stay with me a little longer. I share stories like this every day, quiet, real, and about the moments that change everything. Hit that subscribe button. Let's walk through these quiet storms together. What about you? Have you ever had to step back and let someone you love face the consequences of their own choices? What was that like for you? Tell me in the comments below.